Hi, my name is Martin Purnell and welcome to Off-Grid Christianity, a weekly podcast for those who go or don't go to church and for those that are disillusioned. Email us, should you wish. Our address is ogc@accessradio.biz. Biz is spelled B-I-Z. And check out our Facebook page as well, which is Off-Grid Christianity. Our guest today, sitting in front of a fantastic fire, and that's why you hear the crackling in the background. Our guests today are a husband and wife who met in Canada. Aaron later planted and pastored a church for 10 years in Victoria, British Columbia. And in 2018, Aaron and Grace, plus their 5 children, moved to Kenya before returning with family to Northern Ireland in 2020, just in time for lockdown. So, what's it like to start a Bible college in Kenya? What are the pros and cons of homeschooling your children? How do you cope when 3 of your children have cystic fibrosis and also diabetes? And what's it like to live off-grid? And what is the Krupf Project? It gives me great pleasure to talk to the author of Johann Ludwig Krupf, his life and legacy, and that's Aaron Dunlop and his wife Grace. Thank you guys for inviting us down here today, and thank you for a lovely, lovely lunch as well. So that always goes down well. But obviously, before we get to those answers, 5 important questions to ask you guys. Are you sitting comfortably? Good stuff. Right. Okay, Grace, you can start first then. Question number 1. If you could invite anybody from history for an evening meal, alive or dead, so that you could ask them questions, who would it be?
Well, for me it would be a lady called Rachel Stewart Watt, who not many people have heard of actually.
Nope.
I've been doing a wee bit of research on her because she is a lady who lived in the same part of Kenya we did.
Okay.
Way back in the late 1800s. She was a missionary. So I've been learning about her, and she's a fascinating person.
Brilliant. What kind of questions would you ask her?
Oh, how did you survive a lifetime in Kenya? Under very difficult circumstances. I just like to meet her just to see. Yeah. And because she writes in Victorian language, you know, it's very highfalutin and very wordy, and I'd like to meet the real woman. You know, I think Victorian era authors wrote about themselves and their stories in a very packaged kind of way, and I'd love to meet the real woman and maybe see a little bit of her raw, you know, down to earth side.
Did she like Kenya at all?
I think she loved it, but there were some real struggles.
Yeah.
You know, but she was very faithful wife and mother. So
her husband actually, they moved to Australia for health reasons. And then he moved her back to the bush.
The second time?
The second time. So they had to give up a home a second time.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, she was quite a character.
Great answer. No doubt we'll talk about Kenya later on then.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the name again?
Rachel Stewart Watt.
Rachel Stewart Watt. Great stuff. Thank you very much, Grace. Aaron, who would you choose, sir?
That's a very difficult question, and I've wrestled with it for the past couple of weeks. There's a number of people, pioneers, but I think I have to settle on Augustine.
All right.
He's a North African. He was North African church father and theologian and writer, and one of the most influential Christian writers in history. But I would like to meet him because he was a very deep thinker, extremely deep thinker and theological mind. But also because he was North African, he was African. I know he was north of the Sahara, and I'm working in sub-Saharan Africa. Mm-hmm. But I think that the African Christians should know that much of the theology that we enjoy today, the formulation of theology, happened in North Africa. The formation of universities, libraries, that all happened in North Africa.
Yeah, but isn't the oldest library in the world in Morocco or something like that?
Yeah.
Alexandria.
Yeah, it was one in Alexander's toss-up between Alexandria and Timbuktu. But yeah.
Wow.
So the theology, the doctrine of the Trinity and the fundamental theology formulations that we enjoy today and know as basic, were all formulated by North African Christians, and Augustine was. Plus his argument against Pelagius and the understanding of humanity, the understanding of himself which is another very interesting slant on why I would like to meet him, because he was a man who understood himself. Pelagius, on the other hand, didn't understand himself because he didn't believe in original sin, that they were sinners in Adam. He sinned by his own free will, so he didn't really understand himself. So I don't really want to talk to someone who doesn't understand themselves.
And which century are you talking about?
5th century.
5th century.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He was just a deep thinker, and every line of Augustine's writings is like a thought bubble.
And what language would he speak in the
Would have
5th
been
century?
Latin.
Latin. Yeah. Just as well.
And I would read it in English.
Yeah, obviously. I do. Having translated it from Latin.
Yes.
Good answers. Thank you. Question 2. We'll start again with you, Grace, if that's all right. Who is your favourite biblical character, or favourite biblical story, or favourite parable, please?
I think this was a hard one. It would have to be Ruth. Ruth or Esther, but I'll settle on Ruth. Hard choice. No, it doesn't have to be a woman, but but I love Ruth. I love the story of Ruth. I think because she was a woman who went through a lot of change and transition, and she did that through faith. And then coming to a new country with her mother-in-law and caring for her mother-in-law was a very selfless act in a way. But then also her trust then in that the Lord would provide, and then the way the Lord did provide through Boaz. It's a very comforting story.
It is.
And we've traveled about a bit, so I can kind of relate to her having to move about. So.
But you weren't bitter when you were moving out?
I hope not. Maybe here and there.
Was it
No,
Myra, I think, the original?
Ruth was not bitter. That's the thing I like about her. She was very content, and she made up her mind, I'm going with you, Naomi. I'm going to do what I need to do. She was faithful in the small things, and then the Lord blessed her for it.
Brilliant. No, that's a great answer. I did a musical once back in my Bristol days, and it was called Love Song in Harvest, and it was all about the story of Ruth. So, yeah, thank you for that. Question 2 for you then, young Aaron. Who's your favourite biblical character, or favourite biblical story, or favourite parable, please?
Well, the last question was difficult coming to land on Augustine, but this one is easy. Adam. Because I would like to discover what he was thinking when he ate the fruit in the garden. Mm-hmm. And the whole of chapter 3 fascinates me, Genesis chapter 3, and the process of, he was not deceived. Paul tells us that he was not deceived. He went into his sinful rebellion against God with his eyes wide open. And I'd like to figure out what was going on in his mind, what he thought to be like God meant in his mind.
Yeah.
But also the process that happened after that, when a very pithy statement, the Lord says, or the scriptures records, they knew that they were naked. The consciousness of their nakedness before God, because they hid themselves in fig leaves, right? Mm-hmm. But the fig leaves couldn't cover them from God, so they hid themselves behind the trees in the garden. So they couldn't cover them from God either. God kept pursuing them. And so that whole process of consciousness of sin, the consciousness of his depravity before God in the fall before God, and then after that, what happened after God introduced the gospel in verse 15, he's going to crush the head of Satan, and the joy that he must have felt when the enemy of his soul was going to be crushed, and the fact that he held on to that, and he renamed his wife Eve, the mother of living. The whole story just fascinates me, that process of the fall and redemption of Adam in chapter 3, because Adam does get saved at the end of the chapter. Yeah. So I could spend an evening just roaming through that chapter with him.
That's a great answer. I can't remember anyone ever choosing Adam before, and of course Adam would speak perfect English for that.
He would have to, yeah.
Whatever. Good stuff, thank you. This will be interesting. Question 3. If you were Prime Minister, or I'll let you be President of Canada as well if you want, more about that in a minute, no doubt. If you're Prime Minister or President for the day and could change any law or impose new law, what would it be? This time we'll go with Aaron, please.
Well, this is easy. And I listened to one of your programmes, and you ask one of your guests, and before they answered, I had an answer already in my mind. the same answer.
All right. This would be interesting.
And I thought that in the split second between the question and the answer, I'm thinking it has to be realistic, something that can last, or but maybe that's not in the question, maybe, or maybe you want something fantastical. I don't know.
No, I like silly answers as well.
I would change the abortion law. I think abortion is a travesty on our nation, and the death and the murder of infants, the selfishness that precipitates the whole law and the agenda, I think is horrendous.
Yeah. Well, can I just say, you're not the first person to have chosen that subject. It seems to be the number one by then some on that one. Yeah. Thank you, Aaron. For you, Grace, are you going to be, by the way, are you going to be Prime Minister of the UK, or are you going to be President of Canada? Or Prime Minister
of Canada, I suppose.
Sorry,
yes. Well, this is interesting, saying as the Prime Minister of Canada is trying to bring in laws that promote euthanasia for very not for extreme situations, for everyday situations, mental health.
Right.
Young people walking in to the doctor clinic saying, I need help. And, you know, the extension of the logic is that they will be offering this kind of option.
Really?
Yeah. So it's getting there. And it's posing big problems for doctors. I have a brother in Toronto who's a doctor, and it's a huge problem for doctors because they are legally required to refer patients if they want this kind of access. So it's a big problem for Christians, but just in general, just that culture of treating life as less than precious, you know, it's just very grieving. Yeah. So I would definitely halt all of that.
Good answer. Thank you. Question 4. Outside of family events, what has been your most enjoyable day out? Aaron?
I've wrestled with this one too. I've been a lot of places and seen a lot of things. But the most enjoyable day out / 2 days or 3 days is a visit to Cora, in Cora National Park, just about 60 miles northeast of where we lived in Kenya. You've heard of George Adamson?
Yes, Joy and
George Adamson.
Yeah.
That's Cora was where and then it was taken over for a short while by Tony Fitzjohn, who just died last year, unfortunately, of cancer.
Born Free, of course, is
Born Free, right?
The film, yeah.
But that's just a little fenced compound in the middle of nowhere, 100 miles from the closest town between Mwingi and Garissa, and it was just a little paradise where you could just go and write, not peoply at all, so no interruptions. You have your askari, your guard, who also doubles as your cook, and you're just sleeping outdoors. It's just idyllic. Yeah.
Wow. What does the guard do then?
Well, you need a guard there, and askari who would. It's a gated compound, so you would need a guard. George Adamson was killed by bandits.
Oh yes.
So you would need a guard in that area.
Right.
Yeah. You're close. Well, you're not so close to the Somali borders, but I believe it was bandits who killed him.
Right. But just staying outside in the compound. With your guard.
Yeah.
Having a nice meal.
Having a nice meal with a friend. It was a friend of mine who is looking after part of the compound, or is involved in looking after it.
And obviously thinking of your wife and children back home at the time. Obviously.
Yes.
Goes without saying.
Climbing up the mountain to the rocks where he trained the lions to get a signal. I could get a signal up there and call Grace and make sure she was okay. It was about a 2 or 3 day visit. Or one night, maybe it's just one night. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sounds brilliant, must admit. Sounds brilliant. Grace, what about yourself?
Oh, that's tough because I'm pretty much always with my family.
You could say when your husband left you so you could have peace and quiet for 3 days whilst he was out with the lions.
I was going to say a day on the beach in Donegal, but I was with family, so.
Well, I'll let you have that.
But yeah, I love the beach, so any chance I would get just a day on the beach with me and a book at the beach, that would be my favorite day out.
Brilliant.
In warmish weather.
Yes.
No windbreaker.
Yeah.
No windbreaker, and you don't.
A wild beach. That's why I like Donegal, because it's wild. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not as, touristy, and there's no shops, and there's just lots of wild grass and sheep.
And beautiful beaches, beautiful blue seas.
Oh, it's just so beautiful up there.
Just slightly colder.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying about a windbreaker.
I was thinking of getting water.
We were there this time last year, and we actually got some warm beach days, kids were in shorts.
Wow, that's great. It's just the sea, a bit colder for me, that's all. But yes, it is lovely. Not that I'm promoting as part of the tourist board for Donegal, but it is breathtaking over there.
It's nice.
It's really good. Question 5. What has been your most embarrassing moment? Let's go with Aaron again, Sri, first of all. Build it up.
I'm not going to tell you my most embarrassing, which was a language issue in France. My most embarrassing moment, I think, outside of that one, or next to that one, was as a student. There's a couple of events actually that happened a couple of times. As a student, I was leading the singing in church. I was preaching in a particular congregation. It was a small church. And I was leading the singing, and between the verse and the chorus, I encouraged the people to sing. Let's hear you sing. And in that little pause between the verse and the chorus, I shouted out, let's hear you sing. And the pianist was just down below me. And I frightened her, and she stopped. And everybody stopped. So it was just very embarrassing. The other event, which was also in a church and involved singing, was, I think it must have been my first communion. I was conducting a communion service for the first time. And it was common, it's a communion time when you're in devotional time and you're meditating as the elements are passed around. And it was common in our church for a member of the congregation or the pastor to start up a verse of a song, a hymn. Break thou the bread of life, dear Lord, to me. And I was in a different church, and as I was leading the communion service, and I thought, I'll sing this song, and nobody knew it. I sang the first verse solo and give up. So there are 2 embarrassing moments for the more embarrassing one.
But your singing was so good, they all stood up and applauded.
Yeah, not. Hopefully those who were there have forgotten it by now.
If you were one of those people, please let us know. And that'd be great. Thank you, Aaron. And for yourself, Grace, what has been your most embarrassing moment to date, please?
Well, I think one of them anyway was when I was a young mother with a young toddler who was learning to be potty trained. And I had thought he had been fairly well potty trained. We were invited up to a cottage on Vancouver Island. Some friends of ours were on the island for a few days and said, come on up for the day. So we went up, and this particular family were very posh, very British, and very proper. And it was a lovely, beautiful cottage. And my young child at the time, I won't name any names, but he was up in the loft.
It's narrowing it, the fact you said he.
Oh dear. Didn't mean to do that. He was up in the loft playing away, and all of a sudden, the other children of the other family let out a horrified yell, and my son had just, used the facilities right there on the carpet.
Oh.
What they call in Africa, a long call.
Yes. Oh, I was mortified. So that was not fun.
And if your son's listening, you haven't mentioned his name, so he's slightly okay on that one. This is Thank you.
Those were the days when I was a young mother and I probably cared too much about my reputation. So it's just so embarrassing.
I'm sure many a parent can lay claim to that similar story. Listen, that's great. Thanks for that. And obviously, it's only fair just to place it a bit further as far as you two are concerned. You haven't got a Northern Ireland accent. Please tell us more where your accent's from and how you met your hubby, please.
So I grew up in Canada, so it's a Canadian accent. Although I was born, funny enough, in Ballymoney. I was born in Ballymoney, and Mum and Dad are from Oma. So our roots are here. But when I was 1, we moved out to Vancouver. My dad planted a church in Vancouver. Yeah, I grew up. I came back and forth a few times, but I, basically see myself as Canadian.
Yeah. You haven't got a Northern Ireland accent.
No, I thought I would pick it up, but I think sometimes I hear myself with the lilt.
When we visited, she had, very often we would come over for 3 or 4 weeks or more, and she had a pseudo-Canadian
Yeah, when I was
accent.
younger.
It was terrible. It was terrible.
It's when you sort of end up a sentence saying, your boy, yeah.
Yeah, something like that, yes. Or rubbish. You hear yourself saying rubbish, and you're like, what? What am I saying?
Because it'd be trash back there.
Yeah, garbage.
You see, you're becoming more Northern.
Well, I find the children use all the words now.
Yes.
Yeah, they haven't got the accent so much, but they use the words because their friends use the words.
Yeah. Well, our son's been over here for nearly 20 years. He came over when he was like 4 or 5. And he's still got his English accent.
Oh, wow.
But he throws in all the colloquialisms, you know.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So how did you meet hubby then?
Aaron came out to Vancouver to study and ended up coming to our church and ended up preaching at our church. And then my dad had him stay at the house. Over the summertime? My mom and dad offered him to stay at our house. I was away for the summer, and I came back. He had moved in, so I saw a lot. I saw a lot of him then that fall. So that's how we met.
Autumn, please.
Autumn.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And that's how you met.
Yeah.
Oh wow! Wow.
And her mum asked me to marry her, and so I married her.
Ah, that's lovely. I've also mentioned as well, and you've mentioned the word Kenya a couple of times in previous answers, Aaron. So there's obviously a love affair for Kenya. Where did Kenya first come to be in your life?
I first visited Kenya in 1995. My father and I went out for 3 weeks. We were visiting pastors in Nairobi, and then we went across to Ugandan border, just visiting churches. That was the first time, and then I obviously gone to Canada and planted a church then in Canada. And in 2016, I was invited back to the same area actually, Mwingi County, Kitui County, Mwingi District, to do a seminar. And I went back again in 2017. So that was the reintroduction. My father had gone out then. When I went off to Canada, my father went out to Kenya. He had left the ministry and gone to Kenya to start a mission.
What did he do when you say he was in the ministry?
He was a pastor here in Ireland. And so he'd gone to Kenya, and so then I was invited out to do a seminar. Wow. So that was the reintroduction, if you like, to the work in Kenya. Yeah.
And I mentioned also you started a Bible college in Kenya.
I went out. That was my plan to go out. I'd been out 2016, 2017 to do a seminar with the organisation FAME. So I felt called to help the pastors in Kenya. Mm-hmm. And so we all went, my family went in 2018 to help start a small Bible college associated with that organisation.
Got you. When you say FAME, just to clarify that, we're not talking about Irene Cara FAME and the FAME Academy, we're talking about another FAME. What FAME is that?
Friends of Africa Missionary Endeavour. A small missionary organisation here from Northern Ireland, but working in that particular area of Kenya.
Yeah. So you took your family to Kenya to help out there. How many children do you have at the time when you went over there then, Grace?
We had 5. Mm-hmm.
So what was it like being a mother, having had all the enjoyment of Canada and the health service and things like that, to then pack your bags, knowing that's what God was calling you to do, to go to Kenya? What was it like?
It was hard, to be fair. It was good, it was interesting, and it was definitely a step of faith.
I should maybe answer this partly because the Lord called, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead.
I felt the Lord calling me to work in Kenya.
Yeah.
And when we first got married, our plans were to go to West Africa. That's why I had gone to Vancouver to do linguistics. So when we got married in 2002...
2003.
03, sorry.
Can you just hear that?
There'll have to be a cut there. 2003, we'd got married to be missionaries. That was the plan. But then things changed and I planted a church in Victoria. So then the children came along with health issues, cystic fibrosis and type 1 diabetes. So it was a major issue, and it was really wiped off the board, the possibility of going full-time to Kenya. So I had left it with the Lord, and this is why I want to interject and answer this for her. I had left it with the Lord to speak to her, and I wouldn't speak about it again. And one night I remember her sitting up in the bed, and we had moved to Toronto by that time, and she said, "I'm not willing to go, but I'm willing to be made willing."
Brilliant. And
that was her words. And from that, the Lord began to work on her and see her sure that the kids could survive in the bush.
Well, I'll tell you what, that was a good interjection, I have to say. We've heard the side from Aaron. Mm-hmm. Tell me about it from your point of view then, Grace.
Well, I just had felt the Lord working in me to let go of that, my sense of control over the children's health. You know, we did have good health care. We had all the medication we needed. So, and the kids had been quite healthy. So when we talked to the doctors, they said, yeah, this could be possible. I had walked in trembling into the doctor's office thinking that they would be very upset with us and say, no, you can't do this. You should not do this. But the Lord just, from the minute I finally said, okay, let's look into this at least. Let's think about this. The Lord just paved the way from the beginning, and I just had to keep walking. And we didn't know if the doors would close. We didn't know if there would become a point where we could say, well, we've tried, it's not going to work. We're just going to stay in Canada. We did have that sense that this was the Lord, and if he wanted it to happen, it would happen. Even throughout that period of preparation, the doctors were helping us. The pathologists put us in touch with the people in Kenya. We got the lab set up the right way. Like, there was a lot of groundwork that had to be done, but we were able to do it. And I am not a go-getter, so this was big. This was big for me to be discussing these things with hospitals and putting this person in touch with this person and getting it all set up. But it worked, and I have to say the doctors were amazing. They were very good. They were very positive. Had the kids not been well at the time or something, there was a lot of factors that could have prevented us going, but it was just the right time, and the Lord paved the way. And within that, I kept meeting people. It never had happened to me before, but I kept meeting people and say, oh, I've been to Kenya. I go out to Kenya once a year and do surgeries, and there's everything modern you might need in Nairobi. There's everything medical you could need. You'll have a great time. You'll enjoy it. And it just, those encounters put me at ease. And the Lord knows, and the Lord knows how to prepare us for something.
Yeah.
So then when we arrived, that was the first task, was just to get the healthcare set up, make sure we knew where our medications could get delivered to the compound, and then we lived on a compound with medical staff, so that was a comfort. The kids could be hooked up to an IV if necessary, so that was important. It never actually happened. The Lord was so good. We never had any major disasters in terms of diabetes. Thomas did get sick at one point and ended up in hospital for quite a few weeks, but the Lord just continued to provide, and I learned I had to walk the walk of faith one day at a time, and then your confidence grows. As the Christian life, you mature and your confidence grows. Well, over those 2 years, the Lord kept showing me how he could provide, and it wasn't that miracles happened and the children never got sick, or we never ran out of medication and had to drive 4 hours into Nairobi or anything, but it's just that we had what we needed when the time came. We had the doctors. We found a doctor who had been trained in South Africa, and he was actually in touch with 3 different doctors in Europe and Israel, CF doctors. So he was he knew his stuff, and that just put me at ease. Whereas I had been told, by different people in Canada, nobody knows about CF in Kenya. There's no way you can live out there. We had been, I hadn't been told that by doctors, but I had been told that by certain people, and there was a little bit of pushback.
Yes.
Which was tough, but I just knew it wasn't me. I knew it wasn't me coming up with this crazy idea, and I had to submit to it. So
wow, thank you for that. CF, cystic fibrosis. Mm-hmm. I think most people would have heard of that, but don't actually know what it is. Mm-hmm. So please tell us more about what CF is, please.
Well, it's a genetic disease, which is from birth. It's a cellular, malfunction.
Autoimmune disease?
No, diabetes is the autoimmune. No, it's a mutation. That's what I'm looking for. Mutation of the gene, which means that the cells don't open properly. There's there's a cell door on every cell, and it doesn't open properly to allow salt in. Therefore, water doesn't follow. Therefore, the mucus that is in every cell of your body is sticky. It's not fluid enough. So this is a huge problem for every organ of the body, not just the lungs. A lot of people don't realize that. It can affect every organ, but it shows up mostly in the lungs because of the severity of that. It can differ among patients, but it just means that the lungs of a CF patient trap a bacteria that you probably have never heard of, and it's bacteria that lives on your skin. It's bacteria that lives in water, in the air, in soil. You can't really get away from it.
Yeah.
You can't avoid it. There's some you can do your best to avoid, but so a lot of times by 20s, 30s, 40s, a patient can be really struggling. A lot of lung damage can happen, hardening of the lungs, they call it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's just prevention. It's all prevention. From day one, we were doing physiotherapy and things like that. And of course, they take different medications.
Yeah. I would think most people listening today would say, well, if we felt called by God to go to Africa, name a country in Africa, and then all of a sudden you look at your 5 children, of which 3 have got CF, most people would say, no, I can't go now. I've got to put my kids first. How many people came out of the woodwork and said to you, I don't think you should be going?
Yeah, we had a number of people, close people to us actually. And they cared, so I understand.
Yeah.
They were concerned, thought we were crazy.
Which actually, it's hurtful, and it was hurtful for Grace especially, but it has a way of making you think through. Ironically, it emboldens you in what you're doing.
Yeah.
If you feel it's off the Lord. And this is what I learned at the time, that faith, we talk about a blind faith, but faith is actually eye-opening. It opens your eyes to what is possible with the Lord. This is what we learned at the time. This is what Abraham, they'd been given the promises, having seen them afar off, not having received them, the author to the Hebrews says,
yeah.
but having seen them afar off. So faith is actually eye-opening. And this is something we worked through. The Lord was opening our eyes to see what He could do. And with the pushback that Grace got, particularly poignant for Grace. It emboldened her in it, I think, and strengthened her in it.
Well, I think it confirmed to me this wasn't my own idea, because normally I crumble at criticism. I wasn't doing this for my own glory or for my own good looks. It wasn't a project that I was taking on for affirmation, because I was not getting much affirmation.
No.
So that confirmed to me this is the Lord asking me to do this. And there were times where I thought, well, it doesn't really make sense. Why us? Why? There's loads of families out there without any health issues. They could go.
Yeah.
But I've learned the Lord loves to work through weakness, and we just had to trust Him. That's all there was to it. Yeah.
What you're doing is pragmatism, really. That you're trying to work it all the way through, just to make sure it's okay. From your point of view, obviously you had to go, but what pitfalls were you experiencing at the time about going over there, if any?
There were none, because I had been unsettled in the pastorate in Victoria, and I'd left Victoria, and we had gone to Toronto by faith that the Lord would open a door. Mm-hmm. So I had gone from the pastorate in Victoria to Toronto into secular employment. So Africa was an opening of the door into the Lord's work again, which I had looked to the Lord for, and that's what I had asked the Lord before I'd left Victoria. So to me it was opening, and for me to leave it with the Lord then, and for the Lord to work on Grace was an act of faith. I was just waiting my time until the Lord worked on her heart.
Well, and you were almost called to a Baptist church.
At that time I was candidating for a Baptist church actually, and interviewed also
in Canada.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in Ontario. So that's a good point.
You had to say no to that.
So that tension then came in. Was it Africa or the pastorate in Ontario?
And I desperately wanted to put roots down. It hurt so much to have to move and leave behind Vancouver Island. And I, with all my heart, I wanted roots, and I wanted security, and I wanted that forever home where your kids grow up and then they come back and they visit, with their children and say, well, this is my bedroom, this is where I was born. And, that's what I'm very idealistic that way. And the Lord really worked on me and asked me to give all that up. And
plus the church that we were candidating for, we became very close to the congregation and a particular family in particular. It was difficult to say no.
Yeah.
So what swung it?
Well, no, it was difficult in the sense that here was a people who wanted us, and I was preaching a lot for them.
Yeah.
I think we were just.
But I was convinced in my mind that it was Africa. I'd been out. Yeah. I'd been out to do the seminars, and I'd seen the need, and I really enjoyed the work. I like teaching.
Yeah.
I'd been in the pastorate and I wanted to go into teaching.
Yeah, yeah.
So Africa was the teaching ministry.
I think you were coming to the point where you were ready to pursue the Baptist Church in Canada because you didn't think I'd ever come on board.
Yeah, that was probably right.
But I had been very convicted and become more and more unsettled that I needed to at least tell him, well, you can do what you feel the Lord wants you to do, and I'll fall in. Because I had been holding on.
This is like confession.
It's good, isn't it?
I had been holding on so tight, and for weeks I said, I'm not going to mention what I'm feeling to him. I'm not going to mention my thoughts. I thought they'll just go away, because I wanted that stable, secure church pastorate position again with all my heart. That's what I wanted. But I knew in my heart, if I push this, and if I push him into this situation, and he's not 100% where he ought to be, well, I'll just regret it later. And I wanted to be in the center of the Lord's will. So even though I knew there'd be challenges.
Yeah. I think it was my wife. I'll give her the name check on this one. Some of the early days, like one of the good thing about a husband and wife team is that, especially if the husband is trying to do God's will, he might get the vision, but it's up to the wife then to say, yeah, okay, what about the visas? What about this? What about that? You've got your vision, but is this the whole thing coming together? Mm-hmm. So
she's the hurdles, and if you can get over the hurdles, you got the vision. It's complementary.
Yeah.
It's complementary. It works well. It works together if we let it work together. I was never going to go to Africa and drag her there. That wasn't the option. Wasn't an option. But it works together, and the Lord melts it together.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, you're obviously not in Kenya now, because I can vouch it's a bit cold outside, right. So I've got a feeling we're not in Kenya. You started a Bible college over there. What brought you to Northern Ireland? The
mission that we were with when I had gone out, when we had gone out in 2018, the mission was struggling within itself and with personnel. So when I arrived in February 2018, other members of staff had already left the field and come back home, and so we were left to run. We were running the compound. There was other members had left also, so we had picking up pieces and running a compound. And we had a staff of 48 or 49 on the payroll. We had an orphanage, a baby rescue unit, vocational training for boys and girls, sewing machines and sewing and woodwork. We had a clinic on the compound, and a remote clinic, and all of this was ongoing. And I was trying to establish the Bible college in the background and teaching, when I could. And so I came to the conclusion that my calling was not being fulfilled. I was running a compound, a humanitarian compound.
Well, your days were filled with administration.
Yeah, it was just, that's right. It was,
which is important, but it's just not your calling.
It's certainly not my gift. It's certainly not my gift. And it wasn't my desire. I wanted to be teaching. I wanted to be working with the pastors. Yeah. So we came home in 2020, in February 2020, and we set up another project where I could work from Ireland, and I came back here because I had connections here, obviously. But it's closer to Kenya. To fly from either Toronto or Victoria, you have 8 hours difference. True. 10 hours if you're counting to Kenya.
Yeah.
So it's a huge time difference, not to mention the flight times. Yeah. And it's hard on the body that if you're traveling back and forth. Yeah. So we came here, we connected here, and my intention is, and I do travel back and forward then to do my work in Kenya.
I don't even notice, but over the fantastic lunch you provided, I was asking all your children, kids, whatever the terminology is these days, to get down with them. If they could go back to Canada or Kenya or stay in Northern Ireland, where would they like to live? And Kenya was being flown at the top of the flagpole. It was great to hear. Mm-hmm. So they obviously enjoyed it, but also there must have been, and this is what I'm leading to now. I said at the beginning, there's often disillusionment in Christians today for whatever reason. I'm guessing here that you might have been disillusioned at times, having gone from Canada straight into a complete different country. What does disillusionment mean to you guys from your Kenyan trips, amongst other things?
Well, what comes to mind when you ask that question, what comes to mind in my experience is what's called reverse culture shock. I'd I spent a year in Jamaica in 99 to 2000. I pastored a small church there.
Oh, wow.
So when I came back from Jamaica and saw again the materialism here compared to the poverty in Jamaica, there was a reverse culture shock. You know, when you go to a particular culture and you miss the materialism, they call that culture shock. But when you come back to your own culture and you're critical of it, and I became very cynical and critical of people in Northern Ireland and people in the West and their materialism, and very critical. And I remember one person in particular rebuked me severely, and I took it, and it was proper rebuke, because it's a different economy, it's a different life, and so there was no. For me anyhow, I'd been used to travelling, to interacting with different cultures and different economies. So to me there was no real, difference or difficulty in slipping into Kenya in the bush, or living in North America, and hotel visits and, the travel life. And it's a very nice life. We had a very nice life in Canada. So, I'm adaptable that way, I think.
Well, I think for us, we'd moved from one denomination to another. We'd left the church that we'd planted, left that and had to find a new church in Ontario, and then left that again to go to the bush to no church. And then since then we've left Kenya and had to find a church and a community here. But I think rather than delusionment, it's been a blessing, and we've always tried to put it in that light to our children, because everywhere we've been able to find God's people. We found a lovely group of people in our church in Toronto, in different scenarios actually, because Aaron had been preaching elsewhere. And then when we went to Nairobi or Kenya, yes, we missed church fellowship very much, and we felt that deeply. But then we were able to find, once a month usually, we'd be able to get to Nairobi, found a church in Nairobi. And then there was Christian fellowship on the compound as well with the employees.
Yeah.
And then Aaron was preaching every Sunday in a different church in little rural places, and often the older kids would go with you. I couldn't always go because I had a toddler, but they'd be every week a different mud hut church, but doing the same things, praising the Lord, praying together, hearing the word, and I think that has allowed them to flourish. It's nice to have consistency. Like, it is nice now that we're here and have consistency. But I think overall the moving about has been positive, because we've found fellowship and we found help. People that were willing to help us in Nairobi.
In the mercy of God, because there is that loneliness for lack of fellowship. And I hope the kids now appreciate fellowship. The Church Grace especially felt the lack of fellowship in Kenya. I was busy preaching here and there, but Grace had no real church fellowship, and that was difficult.
Yeah.
I didn't notice it. Grace, I think, noticed it more maybe there. I didn't notice it until we come back here and plugged into a church, and you realise what you're missing by the lack of fellowship and no church. And it was a shock actually to me to realise what we've been missing here. So I appreciate the fellowship of the Lord's people and the attendance at the church, which you grow up in it and you take it for granted.
Yeah.
And that's a whole new subject, and just taking things for granted.
Right.
It's like, we've got a lovely wooden fire here going at the moment, we've got electricity all around us that can use. Go to the bush, maybe not the same environment, because we've got a husband and wife team here today. I'm going to ask the same question, but I'd like you to be honest, but obviously from a male perspective and a female perspective. You've mentioned about CF and the cystic fibrosis and what that actually is and what that means. The fact you've got 2 children with CF, as a bloke, what does that mean to you?
That's a difficult question. At the beginning, I didn't know what CF was. When the nurse came, or the doctor called us and wanted both of us to come into to her office, remember, and to speak to her, we knew there was something up. The heel prick test had been done at birth, so we knew there was something. But I sat there and listened to her, and I didn't know what CF was. Grace, I think, broke down there and then,
I knew a family with 2 girls.
That's
with
right.
CF.
And I later got to know them. So there was a laissez-faire attitude on my part. And then I realised, and I realised what was entailed in the sickness and the disease. But I'm very thankful now, even in the years since our children were diagnosed, in those just few short years, the research and development in the medical profession that has advanced tremendously is phenomenal. And so, I taught the children right from the get-go that this is a serious disease. We're facing death every day, them more so, because of the disease. And so I taught them up front the seriousness of the disease, the reality of death, and the seriousness on the need then for preparing for death. And I think this is maybe not from my perspective, but from a father's perspective, it has brought the kids together, I think, and they help each other, they pray for each other, they're aware of the difficulties. There was, and I don't want to get controversial, but in the church that I was pastoring at the time when Emily was diagnosed, there was an element within the church who wanted me to pray for healing. And it wasn't on my radar at all. And I preached that Sunday. The following Sunday, if I had to do it again now, I would take a few weeks off. And I would advise a young pastor to do that. But
so why?
Just to process it.
Yeah.
But I was in the mill. I was planting a church. It was my baby. I felt it was on my shoulders. It's not. It's the Lord's church, right? It's going to sink or swim by the Lord, not by me, right? So there's the first element. But I preached that Sunday. I think it's Psalm 65. By awful things, the Lord.
Great and terrible.
By great and awful things, the Lord does terrible things. Something like this. Answers us. And the meaning of the text essentially is that the Lord answers our prayers by doing things that cause us to stand in awe of Him, right? And I processed this, and I processed it in 3 main points that morning, preaching about this new diagnosis that the Lord had given us. That the Lord does terrible things. The Lord does terrible things, things that cause us to stand in awe. He does them in answer to our prayers. He answers us. We pray for sanctification. The Lord uses a lot of methods to sanctify us, right? And some harsh methods and hard for us to take, but they're processing and character building and faith building. And He does them so that we stand in awe of Him, right? So this is the Lord's doing. And the same word is used in that text that's used in the other verse. I don't want to misquote the citation, but we are fearfully and wonderfully made. We're made in a way that causes us to stand in awe. And that's another thing we've learned, the awesomeness of God in creation. And I made the point that Emily or Thomas or any child born with a physical disease, a disease or a physical ailment, is made in the image of God, but they were sewn together in the womb by God, right? And so we think, oh, we're fearfully and wonderfully made. We think, well, that only applies to somebody whose heart beats like a Swiss watch, or who has a physical structure and stature of Michelangelo's David. So these great physical abilities. But it's not. It's the child born with cystic fibrosis or cerebral palsy or Down syndrome. The Lord has knit them together in the womb. That's His work. That child is fearfully and wonderfully made.
Yeah.
Just the same as that quote unquote perfect child.
Yeah.
So that I've processed that, and I learned that through that process.
That's a great answer. That really is, because I'm sure there are people listening today who would say, well, if I was in that boat, or maybe they are in, a similar boat, they just want to go and blame God.
Yeah, no, I believe in the absolute sovereignty of God, not just as the God of creation who holds the stars and the sun and the moon in place, but the God who knows every detail, who not only knows it, but He has ordained it,
Yeah.
for his glory. So every detail of humanity has been ordained by God, and he's a God who is loving. He is a God who is all-knowing. He's omniscient. He's a God who is all-powerful.
Yeah.
And so my theology then dictated my life,
Yeah.
right, and how I processed it and acted it out.
Yeah.
And so I had to wrestle through that, because there were people in my congregation who were kicking back and wanting to pray for healing. And I felt personally that it would have been wrong for me to pray for healing because of that.
Yeah.
That never even entered my mind.
Do you know, I know that there's a big thing. You mentioned abortion in one of your questions, anti-abortion, and that for Down syndrome, a couple of years ago over here, there was a famous actress and other mothers, who've got Down syndrome children, and saying, no, you can't do this. Look, they are wonderful kids. We love them. We wouldn't have them now, sort of thing. And so to see them the knit in the womb, that's a great answer. Thank you. And that's from a man's perspective, to work that logic through.
The logical perspective.
Well, that's good. No, I'll say it's good, because you need time out to think things through, to process through. So you logically were able to come to that conclusion. Whereas if it being me, I'd most probably go and blame God straight away. I then go away and think about it and realise that maybe I shouldn't be blaming him after all, and he's got bigger shoulders than me. But from your point of view, Grace, from the female perspective, the fact you had not just one but two children with CF, where did you feel you were before God on that one?
Well, by the time Emily was born, I had two young children with diabetes, type 1, which is a full-time 24/7 job, monitoring them. But I sort of felt that we were doing a pretty good job, and it was manageable. It was coping. I thought I was coping okay. But I would say the Lord had really prepared me a year before. I had felt a terrible unsettledness in my walk with him. I had felt, I'd been praying that the Lord would draw me closer to him, bring me nearer to him. I had felt a terrible sense of apathy, I think would be the word. So all throughout that pregnancy, it was a strange time for me spiritually. And looking back now, even upon diagnosis, it just hit me. The Lord has been preparing me for this for over a year. Just what I had been processing. So it's almost as if all that processing had happened before I'd come to that conclusion that I had really settled on Matthew 5, and the Lord promising they that hunger and thirst after righteousness. That's a prayer that he would answer, that he could answer. They will be filled. And that had been a theme through that whole year before. And when Emily was diagnosed, then I sort of thought, this is the Lord's answer. This is the Lord answering my prayer to be filled. In some ways, it was easy to accept then. In other ways, it was very difficult. I would swing back and forth between feeling a sense of joy over the Lord dealing with me and with our family, and then a sense of terror for my child and grief. Everybody wants to bring in a healthy child into the world, but when you bring in a child that has a disease and their life will be filled with struggle and possibly pain, thankfully now with new medication and that, things are looking very good. But when she was born, I had no idea this medication would be available within a decade, and you just feel such a heavy burden of responsibility. I brought this child into the world, and death and the reality of eternity weighs very heavy on you. But I think that's a good thing. I think we have worked through a lot of stuff early on in our lives because of all this, and our children have had to work through, a lot of this stuff, a lot of sort of daily struggle. And, I would say that my big prayer at the time was, how am I going to raise these children and keep them healthy and happy? I wanted a happy home. I wanted to be a happy mom. And, there's just some days where you just wake up and you think, how on earth am I going to be happy today with all of these therapies and things to look out for and things to worry about? So that was my big prayer. And the Lord just helped. The Lord just provided. And, I had a husband to talk things over with constantly. We were always discussing and processing things. And, it took a while. There's no instant fix. You just have to get through that process. And the Lord helps, and I feel my life is much richer and fuller for it. You know, my spiritual walk with God, my life with the children. You live more day to day because you don't have any promise of what's going to come tomorrow. You don't take things for granted.
Yeah.
And I'm just grateful for all the time we have together.
Wow, it's fantastic. And I did say right at the very beginning that it's amazing how we start on one subject and we'll end up someone goes somewhere else. I did not know we'd be spending this amount of time. And I thank you for your honesty and the remaining time, if that's all right. The first thing is I've got pretty certain understanding here that one of the last questions we always have is about who your Christian hero is. And I'm hoping that the Krupp Project might come into that with regard to the gentleman concerned. If not, then please could you use that answer? Because in the remaining time, for those that are listening today, and there'll be people going, do you know what? That's what I'm struggling with at the moment. So from a man's perspective and from a female's perspective, what advice would you give to people who are really struggling with this whole concept of ill children? What would you say for Sir Aaron?
I would encourage them to leave their children with the Lord. On one of my trips while we were living in Victoria, I bought a book. I think it's by Palmer, The Death in the Home. Was it Palmer? Reverend Palmer?
Yeah, I think so.
I wish I knew the name of the pastor, but I think it was Palmer. He buried, I think, 7 of his children. And in that book, which was originally titled Death in the Home, it's been republished. This was in the 1800s. It's been republished with a different title. But he describes the deathbed scene of every child.
Wow.
And he walked through it. And he was dependent on the Lord. It's a huge... Because spiritual warfare, Paul said, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. Right? It's a spirit world we're wrestling. It's the devil and the demons. It's the original sin within us. But spiritual warfare always manifests itself in something, right? I'm reading through Joshua at the minute, right? Mm-hmm. Warfare there was the walls of Jericho, right? Or the city of Ai. Whatever it was, it manifested itself in a tangible physical form. And so it does so with us. Mm-hmm. And so that's part of that warfare then is your sick child. How are you going to process that? How are you going to deal with it? How are you going to leave that child with the Lord?
Yeah.
And I think it's in that book, Death in the Home, where he says he had to leave his children in the hands of God, who is a far better and an infinitely better father than he was. And so I have to trust them to the Lord. He gave them. They're his children. He's given them to us. It's the heritage of the Lord. Now we have been given them to care for and to guide and direct and to bring them up in the fear of God. But they're his. And so I had to learn to do that and to trust the Lord. With that nothing, we think we're in control of anything in life. I mentioned earlier the church. I pastored a church. I thought, this is my church. This is my baby. I have to develop this. I have to grow this. I don't carry that burden anymore. It's the Lord's church. And the Lord builds it, as he has for 2,000 years, without me. Right? I've only come along in the last 50 years, and he still doesn't need me. He uses me mercifully.
Yeah.
But he doesn't need me. And I have to leave those things. And I would encourage parents with sick children to trust the Lord and to get a vision of what the Lord can do if we trust him in that situation.
Yeah.
And the joy, and this is what Paul says in Philippians, that he can give us a peace in the midst of that surpasses our understanding. That's huge. That's what Adam had. This is why I would like to speak to Adam.
Yeah.
Right? Because he had just sinned. He had brought the whole of creation, not just himself, the whole of creation into a state of sin and misery. And he's processing that. This mental torture as the Lord is pursuing him through the garden, and Adam's processing this. And then after the Lord came and says to Satan, I'm going to crush you. I'm going to crush your head and destroy you. That was a symbol of absolute defeat. Adam, that's in verse 15 of the chapter. In verse 16, the Lord deals with the woman. Her whole physiological makeup's going to be affected. In 17 and 18 and 19, the Lord deals with Adam. His work is going to be working, the sweat of his brow, and so forth. And then Adam, in an act of faith, trusts what the Lord had said in verse 15. It was like, I believe the gospel of Genesis 3:15, and it was as though nothing else mattered. What's going to happen to my wife, Eve, and the body and the pain and childbirth, and what I'm going to do in life and struggle through life, that doesn't matter as long as the Lord is going to get the glory and defeat the serpent,
Yes.
crush the head of the serpent. I'm going to hold on to that life.
Yes.
And the Lord himself said, I can give you, in the midst of death, I can give you life more abundant. And in the midst of that, a peace that passes understanding. It's phenomenal. And that's what Adam enjoyed. And that's why I love Genesis chapter 3 and the whole Adam situation.
Yeah.
It's huge. It's huge.
But the thing is that you said two words there for me stick out, and the first word is trust. You have to trust, and the second word you used was if. I think it's some people go, oh yeah, I could do that, but actually in reality, it's like 2 hours later, having left the church, it's like, oh, I don't know, I'm sort of struggling here. I'm struggling. Grace, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, well, there's kind of two paradigms almost. There's where we trust. Yes, we trust, and we believe that the Lord's in control. But then how does that play out tomorrow morning when I wake up and I have to slog through the day again, and it's not easy?
So how did you do it?
Well, I suppose at the time I looked at it as, these are my children. I want to do an excellent job in caring for them. I'm going to throw myself into it 100%. And that gave me a lot of satisfaction. And I felt, I felt happy in looking after my family. So if I felt I was doing a good job, that was fine. But then there were times where we'd hear back from the test results and they'd gotten an infection.
Yeah.
And I was crushed because I thought, well, I didn't do a good job. I didn't prevent them from this and that, or maybe I didn't do enough therapy or whatever. Yeah, it's just a process where you have to learn I'm not in control. And you just take one day at a time, and you just, you pray a lot. There were times when I prayed just every hour to get through the day sometimes, especially if I was waiting on test results and I was overly anxious. Maturity comes. It's been 10 years now since Emily was born. And maturity comes, and you learn about the disease. And so it has got so much easier, especially as they've got older. But now I have teenagers who have diabetes, and Emily's 10. She'll soon be a teenager. She'll be more aware. And they have to carry the burden of this disease because it is a burden. It's easy to say, well, trust the Lord and be happy. Yeah. I'm not saying that's what Aaron said, but
no, not at all.
But there are these cliches, things out there. Well, you just get over it. But when it's your life, it's your life, and you want to enjoy your life. Like, I think that was my big prayer back when the kids were small, is I wanted them to have a happy childhood. I didn't want them to see me moping about, worried all the time. So yes, I did have to sometimes hide the tears and sometimes drop everything and go to the park and go for a walk and enjoy nature. We lived on Vancouver Island at the time, and we just head to the beach. And I think homeschooling also has played into that. It's fit our lifestyle. If one of the kids was having a tough day with blood sugars and didn't feel so good, well, we would have an easier day. Or if I had lost a whole night's sleep, our time was flexible, and Aaron was home as well, which was lovely. So you just had to create those ways to cope. And then the spiritual aspect, I think just time and maturity and prayer does a lot. But then, in terms of the kids growing up, it's not going to be so much my burden as their burden. And that in itself is tough as a mother to realize. This doesn't just affect me, This is their life in real time. How do we prepare them? How do we teach them to have a happy, healthy life and yet also face the reality of it? So I would say, I think your question is, what would you say to parents with ill children?
Yeah.
I would say prepare them for an eternal mindset. Paul talks about this. Let me just get it here.
I was wondering what you do with the phone.
This is a verse that just has gripped me in the last few years. For this light momentary affliction is preparing us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. And
where's that
this,
again? What verse?
2 Corinthians 4, verse 17.
17, I think.
this verse just gripped me because there's the word weight. You live every day with a weight. There's no getting away from it. You know, I don't believe in pretending that there's nothing wrong, right? And I think the best thing you can do for your kids is help them understand that, yes, this is a problem, and not, instead of just, you know, denying it maybe, or saying, well, it's, you know, not a big deal. Let's just go and enjoy whatever. Because sometimes you just have to face the reality that this is tough.
Yeah.
And you're not getting away from it. That's chronic illness is hard that way because there's no cure. You know, there's just therapies. But the therapy and the prevention is work in itself.
Yes.
So it's another layer of burden upon burden.
Yeah.
You know, so you're dealing with this weight, but if we as Christians, we can see this as a weight of glory. And it's this weight that settles on us that teaches us of what is to come. Because I think about eternity a lot more than I ever did. You know, and I want my children to, soak up that sort of reality that this is just a very short, this world, this life is very short in time span. And it's very insignificant. It doesn't feel insignificant now, but when we get to eternity and look back, we'll realize it was just an inch on the ruler or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
And I think the Lord can turn that burden into a weight of glory as we live this life. And that's where the joy comes. That's what makes all that you've learned so precious. Like, I would not change one thing, because everything I've learned, everything I grasp now, I probably couldn't had I not just had to work through all that stuff. And yes, like you say, it is a process. It doesn't happen overnight. And then just passing that on to your children and helping them live those ideas every day. Yeah. You know, that is the challenge, is taking this little frustration, this problem, and talking about it, reminding. And I think families need time. When you have chronic illness, you need a lot of time to process stuff. That will change and that will flow. But I think the joy that we've had as a family over the years is time. That was one of the lovely things in Kenya, is we had so much time together. Then Aaron was in secular work when we arrived here, and he was gone out of the house so much. Now he's back in ministry. He can work from home. He's more flexible. And it's just lovely to have that time. And the homeschooling, I think, has been a benefit. We've had so much time together. We understand each other's burdens.
Yes.
You know, and we can talk about it. And yeah, I think I would say eternity, and then taking that time to work through those ideas.
Well, I can't thank you guys enough, not just for your hospitality beforehand, but your openness and your honesty in your answers. And I bet you didn't think we were going to go this far.
No. Thank you. Let me thank you for the opportunity.
Well, we haven't quite finished yet.
Oh,
because you've got to do your Christian heroes. We always end up by asking our guest of the day who their Christian hero is. Someone who's encouraged them, influenced them, and the only two golden rules that they can't be from the Bible, and they have to be dead. That way, then, you know, we can't be accused a few years' time. Well, I chose such and look what happened to him as a result, or her. So, Aaron, who are you going to go for, please?
Well, I think I have to go for Ludwig Krupp.
Thank you. The reason why I'm laughing is because I was hoping you were going to talk about him, and I mentioned at the beginning that we would ask that question, so I'm okay. Yeah. Carry on. Who is he, please?
Ludwig Krupp was a German who went out to East Africa with the CMS, the Church Missionary Society, which was an evangelical Anglican mission at the beginning of the 1800s. He opened up East Africa for the gospel, arrived in Mombasa in 1844. Just a few weeks later, his wife died and his infant daughter. They were the first Christian graves in East Africa.
Oh, wow.
There in Mombasa. Hugely stubborn individual, and pioneered, was pushing into the interior.
Yeah.
He actually made it on one trip up to Kitui, where we were, and up past to the Tana River, and he almost got killed on the way back. He almost got killed there, actually. The tribe he was with were slaughtered, wiped out, and he survived. He ran into the bush and survived. So Ludwig Krupp, he was a linguist. He was a traveller, pioneering traveller. He was a missionary, pastor, and 2 years after David Livingstone published his travels, Krupp published his in English. They were already published in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
But Livingstone had already got to the gate, and he was better known. But Krupp was actually before Livingstone in East Africa. But it was the travels. You see, people in the colonial Britain were reading the travels of these men across the world, and they were coming back with this material and reading it and just soaking it up. And Livingstone's just was off the shelves. But Krupp published his a couple of years later, and he wasn't well known. Nobody knows about him. I go to churches and even missionaries and missionary professors and seminaries and ask, Ludwig Krupp? Have you ever heard of Ludwig Krupp? Never heard of him. There has not been an English biography written of Krupp for over 100 years. And when I arrived back from Kenya in 2020, just before lockdown, we were locked down for 3 months. I wrote a biography.
Wow.
And published it last year.
Can I just say, for those that want to know more, as I found out, it looks as if it says Krapf, Krapf. But as I never had a German lesson in my life, it's pronounced Krupf.
Yes, I'm glad that my German friends were able to confirm that it's actually pronounced Krupp.
And you do a thing called the Krupf Project. For those that want to know more about Mr. Krupf and your Krupf project, which I've had a look on your website, it is very, very good. What's the address, please, for people to find more information out?
Krupfproject.com.
Dead easy.
Dead easy.
And Krupf again is Krapf.
Yeah.
For those people that can't speak a word of German, it's Krupf with an A. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Grace, who is your Christian hero, please?
Did you say they have to be dead already?
Yes.
Oh, dear.
You were going to mention me?
No. Oh, Elizabeth Elliot. She was a missionary to the Auca.
Tell us more.
I'm sure you've heard of Jim Elliot.
Yes.
Yes. She was Jim Elliot's wife. So she's written a lot of their story and a lot of other books since.
You choose her. Mm-hmm. Why?
She's an amazing communicator, so therefore her books were good to read. Deep thinker. Writes a lot about suffering, so I've read some of her stuff, a lot of her stuff, and just she has this earthy sort of tenacious way of saying, you know what, God is in control, God is sovereign, and she had to explore all of that when her husband died, after only 18 months of marriage or something, and a little daughter left behind. And then she goes into the jungle with her daughter, lives in the jungle for 2 years, I think. She just had an amazing, simple faith, and yet she shared that process with us.
Yeah.
So.
And I think you just nailed it. The whole thing today, God is in control, I think sums it up. Mm-hmm. And I can't thank you enough. Aaron Dunlop, Grace Dunlop, thank you so much for your time today. It's been brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you.